Hello everyone, my name is Mr. Albert Platt and I go to California Baptist University. I'm a grad student in the Department of Kinesiology, and today I'm going to go over a brief tutorial on the fate of lactate. Okay, so we're going to start this tutorial on the fate of lactate. Now, first we must recognize what is lactate and lactic acid, the differences. So, lactate versus lactic acid. So let's first get the fundamentals down. So lactic acid is a milky acid. This acid is formed during anaerobic glycolysis and associates the release of hydrogen ions and the formation of lactate, which is produced via the process of lactic acid fermentation during normal metabolism and exercise when no oxygen is present. Lactate, on the other hand, is a substrate and energy storing and energy generating pathways in different tissues, and the fate is the reconversion of pyruvate to glucose by gluconeogenesis in the process through the Cori cycle. And this is the production of lactate is beneficial for NAD plus regulation, regeneration, as pyruvate is reduced to lactate while NADH is oxidized to NAD plus, which is used up for during production to glucose, and this ensures that energy production is maintained and exercise can continue. Now you're asking yourself, well, what's the difference between lactate, and lactic acid, you say? Well, lactic acid does not cause muscle fatigue. Let's just get that out. Just get it out. And that does not cause muscle fatigue. It's a weak acid, and it happens in short duration of high activity, intense exercise or physical activity, exercise. Lactate, however, is a valuable source of fuel in the skeletal muscle and a non-working muscle. It's fuel for the brain, liver, heart, and kidneys. It's also a buffer, and it balances the acid content of the body as a base. Lactate actually kicks in a longer duration of physical activity or exercise, like a marathon runner needs that extra fuel. Now I put this little sign here that says DONS, right? Delayed onset muscle soreness is not associated with either of the two, as these muscles are affected by three components when exerted. Is, we synthesize receptors in the muscle, the ultrastructural damage to the muscle fibers, and the muscle inflammation after the exerted muscle has been worked through the exercise. Now that we have fundamentals and the basics of lactic and lactic acid, we're going to try to understand what lactic is. So understanding lactate is, first of all, we must understand lactate as as when lactic acid is produced by pyruvate via the enzyme lactate dehydrogenase in a process by lactic acid fermentation during these normal metabolism and exercise. The rate of the energy is high. Glucose is broken down and oxidized to pyruvate and lactate, and then it's produced from the form of causing like a high lactate concentration as it rises, and the production of lactate is so beneficial for NAD plus regeneration because, like I said before, NADH is oxidized and NAD plus reduces the lactate, and which ensures energy production and to just helps keep up with those hydrogen atoms, so it keeps it balanced, so you don't have a lot of acidity in your blood. Now, the resulting lactate, can be used in two ways. Oxidation back to pyruvate through oxidating muscle cells, heart cells, and brain cells. Pyruvate is then directly used to fuel the citric cycle, or also known as the Krebs cycle. Conversion also to glucose via gluconeogenesis in the liver, and it releases back into circulation. Now, if the blood glucose concentrations are high, then the glucose can be used to build up in liver's glycogen stores and used for energy. Now, however, if lactate is continually formed even at rest or during moderate exercises, some causes of this metabolism in red blood cells lack in the mitochondria, and limitations resulting from enzyme activity occurs in the muscle fibers having high glycolytic capacity. So first of all, we understand these options as Cori cycle and understand. So the next is understanding the lactate pathway. So here's some key terms to understand. Glycolysis, conversion of glycogen to glucose. Gluconeogenesis, the conversion of fatty protein to glucose. Lactate threshold is the point during exercise of increased intensity at which blood lactate begins to accumulate above resting levels, where lactate clearance is no longer and able to keep the lactate production. And another transport is called the MCT, which is the MCT is a monocarboxylate transport, which is a special transporter of proteins that facilitate movement of lactate between cells and tissues. Now, a pathway that is from the muscle to liver is known as the Cori cycle. And we're going to get into the Cori cycle in just a minute. First of all, we just got to determine that lactic acid is produced in the muscles, transferred by blood to the liver for reconversion of uric acid to glucose, thus gluconeogenesis, and then is transported back to the working muscle. Cori cycle is much more important source of substrate, as in for gluconeogenesis, than food. So we must understand the contribution of the Cori cycle lactate to overall glucose production comes from protein breakdown, muscle glycogen, and glycerol from lipolysis. So now, muscular activity requires ATP, which is provided to break down the glycogen in skeletal muscle. We must understand that. However, in the liver, the gluconeogenesis occurs when it's converting the lactate to pyruvate to glucose, as this chain supplies glucose muscles into the bloodstream, and thus also known as the Cori cycle. And there's several mechanisms that for energy that happens here. So now one is, lactate is produced by glycolysis in the cytoplasm of muscle fibers, usually type 1 and type 2, and they're oxidized by the mitochondria, but also which occurs in the muscle fiber type 1 and cardiac muscles and liver cells, by the way. Number two mechanism that can happen is lactate is produced, as I said earlier, in the muscle fiber that is transported away in the site of the production called the lactate shuttle. Now, the lactate shuttle produced primarily by the type 2 muscle fibers and is by diffusion or active transport, which allows the glycolytic in one cell to supply fuel for another for the other use of another cell. Now, earlier I mentioned these special transporters called MCT, the monocarboxylate transport, transports lactates between cells and tissues. And let's get into the Cori cycle. Well, first we got to understand too is that nonetheless, during exercise, approximately by 80 to 90% of lactate is transferred across the supplement through MCT. And using this lactate as a metabolic fuel accounts for about 70 to 75% of lactate removal during exercise. Now, lastly, this is the last thing that we need to explain is that lactic acid produced in the muscle is transported by the blood to the liver, where gluconeogenesis reconverts it back to pyruvic acid, back to glucose, then to the working muscle. So it's a big cycle. And like I said, as I mentioned before, the Cori cycle. And the Cori cycle, without the recycling of this lactate to glucose for energy, prolonged exercise would severely be limited, and there's no energy. So lactate is produced in exercising the skeletal muscle and is used in oxidation in the brain. And as lactate is responds to nutrient sensing and different metabolic fuels. So as I go to the Cori cycle, as we see here, let me get my pointer here. So you see the muscle right here. The muscle is breaking down the glucose, right? Which is a monosaccharide, which is a sugar, but we got it down. It breaks it down by glycolysis, breaking down the sugar. You get your 2 pyruvates for the energy, then you get the 2 lactates. So as soon as this happens, these 2 lactates enter the bloodstream, and find its way to the liver. And once it gets to the liver, it goes through this process of producing, from regeneration from the NAD plus, NADH, and it is producing this lactate. Then it's converted to pyruvate, which is producing, after pyruvate to glucose, it brings out 6 ATPs. That's a lot of energy, 6 ATPs compared to the 2 ATPs and the breaking down of those breaking down of the glucose and glycolysis, which everyone knows, happens when there's no, if it's 2 ATP, what happens when there's no, like that fermentation reaction present or another kind of present. But as soon as this AC it gets converted to pyruvate, goes to glucose. Gluconeogenesis in the liver, and the liver produces that glucose, which is exited out through the bloodstream again and into the muscle. So this happens also on like prolonged exercise when you need that extra energy to run like a prolonged race or excess effort. Now let's go over the Sori cycle continuation. Now the cycle is important. This is based on the prevention of lactic acid acidosis in the muscle anaerobic conditions. However, normally before this happens, lactic acid is moved out of the muscle into the liver. The cycle is also important in producing like ATP as energy. Of course, it functions more efficiently when muscle activities has been stopped, ceased. And this allows oxygen debt to be repaid, such as the Krebs cycle, citric cycle. An electron transport chain can produce this energy to help peak efficiency in energy after the exertion. Now, the Cori cycle is a very important source, and it needs, for the lactate to, get changed to overall glucose production. And that comes from the protein breakdown and the muscle glycogen and glycerol from the lipolysis. And that's what's going on through the liver. Now, metabolic lactate use. Lactate production from high efforts is a good thing for metabolic use. It provides like energy for muscle contraction. It creates the fuel for the brain and heart, and it's also converted to glucose in the liver, as I mentioned earlier, lactate shunning. As lactate shunning is through fast-twitch fibers, and it produces lactate circulation to the fast or slow-twitch muscle fibers for the conversion of this pyruvate. Now, the lactate shuttling, which enables the glycogenolysis of one of the cells to supply their cells with fuel oxidation, makes the muscle not the major site of lactate production, but also a primary use for the removal and oxidation of the leftover lactate for oxidation. Now, this response to, like I mentioned earlier, response to changes in nutrient sensitivity and different metabolic fuels are used during this exercise. Now, I'm going to read this key point here. Lactate production from a high effort exercise, as I said, is a good thing. Okay, remember that. I'm repeating, it's a good thing. And lactate is actually a provider of more energy for muscle contraction. Lactate creates a fuel for the brain and heart, and it's converted to glucose in the liver. And now when that's converted, pyruvate converts then into the acetylcoenzyme A and then enters the citrus cycle for aerobic energy metabolism. And that process is all it's called lactate shunning. So which enables the glycogenolysis in one cell to another for the oxidation, as I mentioned before. And it's a primary tissue for lactate movement by oxidation. Lactate accumulation and consequence. Now, after the lactate accumulation, there are some, is there consequences, they say? Well, from the researchers, they study that lactate production and accumulation is accelerated as exercise intensity increases. So as you work out, you increase the accumulation of lactate production. But the muscles do not meet energy demand's needs aerobically, during this process formation. So during the training, adaptations are initiated. Lactate begins to build up during physical activity, and then for the tendency of enzyme lactate dehydrogenase in the fastest muscle fibers, it favors the conversion of pyruvate to lactate, and slow twitch favors the opposite conversion. So it's a reoccurring cycle. One lacks the other, and one lacks the other. So going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Nonetheless, there have been many popular peripheral fatigue theories stating that fatigue is the number one cause by lactate accumulation that hinders exercise. So, lactate is an important fuel source during exercise, and it has no consequence on the accumulation. I'll say it again, has no consequence on the accumulation. So, you got to remember, lactate does not affect fatigue. There's no consequence accumulation. Now, lactate production and accumulation accelerate, as I mentioned earlier, as the extra intensity increases, and the demands are aerobically oxidized during the process of formation, causing fatigue. But there is no consequence. Now, the training adaptations are initiated as lactate begins to build up during physical activity, but the tendency for lactate to rise in the fascial muscles. You've got to remember the lactate is an important fuel source during exercise and has no consequence accumulation. I'm going to finish up with the lactate accumulating consequences as I'll read this for you. Lactate is the primary byproduct of anaerobic lactate energy system. At lower exercise intensities, when cardiovascular to meet the oxygen demands of active muscles, the blood lactate levels remain close and observe the rest. Now, however, some lactate is used aerobically by the muscle or is removed as fast as it enters the blood and the muscle. So you got to remember that as the intensity of exercise is increased, the rate of lactate into the blood from muscle eventually exceeds the rate of removal from the blood. Now, as this blood lactate concentration increases above resting levels, from this point on, the lactate levels then continue to increase, and the rate of work increases until the point of exhaustion. So the concentration of lactate in blood begins to increase above the resting levels, and that is referred to as the lactate threshold. And the lactate threshold is an important marker for endurance performance, as I mentioned before. For long activities, you're going to need that lactate. And the key factors that cause cessation of cellular work, actually for stoppages, glycogen depletion, organic phosphate, heat and muscle temperatures, lactic acid and hydrogen ions. This is when the pH levels get imbalanced because the blood gets more acidic. Neuromuscular transmission, nutrition, physical health, lifestyles, and sometimes, just genetics. So that happens when you don't have the right genetics and your gene pool. But those are the key factors of cellular work that can cause this exercise cessations. Lifestyles like being a cigarette smoker. So that wraps up a brief tutorial on the fate of lactate. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Here are the references that I used. I used Essential Strength Training Conditioning, half and triplet. Physiology Spark Size, 6th edition, Human Kinetics, Kenny Warren Costel, and McCullough Clark and Catch and Catch, and excited for the extra nutrition and performance. Thank you for listening in, and hope you have a good day.